There's nothing quite like the feeling of failing your own child. Matt Colburn knew that hollow ache well as he watched his teenage daughter Emma count their remaining grocery money on the kitchen table. The 42-year-old single father had been out of work for 6 months, and every rejection letter felt like another nail in the coffin of his pride. Then came the inheritance nobody wanted: Uncle Roy's crumbling garage that the whole town called a junkyard. His siblings told him to bulldoze it and sell the land. The neighbors complained about the rust and weeds. Even Emma rolled her eyes when he said he wanted to take a look inside. But sometimes the things that look most broken on the outside hold the greatest treasures within. When Matt pulled back those rotting tarps in the dim garage, he found something that would change everything. 2 mysterious cars with foreign badges and chrome that still gleamed beneath the dust. What he discovered next about his reclusive uncle would reveal a secret worth $150 million. But would finding a fortune be enough to rebuild the trust he'd lost with his daughter? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Matt Colburn had once believed in blueprints. As a senior mechanical engineer at Hartwell Industries, he'd spent 15 years turning complex problems into elegant solutions, translating chaos into order with precise lines and calculated measurements. His drafting table at home still held the remnants of that former life: rolled papers yellowing at the edges, mechanical pencils arranged in perfect rows, a coffee mug that read, "World's Best Dad," from Emma's elementary school days. Those days felt like someone else's life now. The morning sun filtered through their modest kitchen window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor, where Emma sat cross-legged, methodically sorting bills into 3 piles: urgent, overdue, and impossible. At 16, she possessed her mother's sharp intelligence and her father's stubborn determination, though lately that determination had turned into a protective shell around her heart. "Electric bills due tomorrow," she said without looking up, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone that had replaced the laughter Matt remembered from years past. "We can cover it if we skip groceries until Thursday." Matt watched his daughter's careful fingers arrange the papers, each movement deliberate and resigned. When had she become the adult in their relationship? When had he stopped being the one who solved problems and started being the one who created them? "I've got that interview at Morrison Tech on Wednesday," he offered, though they both knew it was his 14th interview in 6 months. Each rejection had chipped away another piece of his confidence, leaving him feeling like a broken machine whose parts no longer fit together properly. Emma finally looked up, her green eyes so much like Sarah's, holding a weariness that no teenager should carry. "Dad, you don't have to pretend with me anymore. We both know how these interviews go." The words stung because they were true. At 42, Matt had discovered that being unemployed for more than a few months marked you as damaged goods in the engineering world. Younger candidates with fresh degrees commanded lower salaries and brought enthusiasm he could no longer muster. The industry he'd devoted his career to had moved on without him. The kitchen fell silent except for the persistent drip of their leaky faucet, another repair they couldn't afford. On the refrigerator, beneath a magnet shaped like a wrench, hung Emma's report card from last semester. Straight A's in advanced mathematics and physics, just like her mother. Sarah would have been so proud. Sarah. Even 3 years after the cancer took her, Matt still reached for her side of the bed each morning, still caught himself buying her favorite yogurt at the store. She'd been the steady one, the practical dreamer who believed in fixing things rather than replacing them. She would have known how to navigate this financial catastrophe without losing Emma's respect in the process. "Remember when Mom used to make those Sunday pancakes?" Emma asked suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "She'd always burn the first one and give it to you, saying it was the cook's tax." Matt smiled despite himself. "She claimed burnt edges," added character. "I think she just didn't want to waste the batter starting over." "She was always finding the good in broken things," Emma said softly, then returned to sorting bills with renewed focus. The phone rang, interrupting the moment. Matt glanced at the caller ID. Henderson, Associates, Attorney at Law. Probably another debt collector using a law firm's name to sound official. He'd learned to recognize their tactics. "Mr. Colburn?" The voice on the other end was professional but warm. "This is Patricia Henderson. I'm calling about your Uncle Roy's estate. I believe you received my letter last week?" Matt had received the letter but hadn't opened it yet. Mail these days brought only bad news, overdue notices, rejection letters, or worse. I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to read it thoroughly. I understand. These matters can be overwhelming. Your uncle Roy Medina passed away 2 weeks ago, and you're named as the primary beneficiary of his estate. There's a property that requires your immediate attention. Uncle Roy. Matt's memory of his mother's younger brother was fuzzy at best. A quiet man who appeared at family gatherings like a ghost, always lingering at the edges of conversations, never staying long enough to become familiar. Matt couldn't remember having a real conversation with him in 20 years. What kind of property? Matt asked, though Emma had stopped sorting bills and was listening intently. It's a garage and automotive repair facility on Sycamore Street, along with a small residential lot. The building requires significant repairs, and there are some environmental concerns about materials stored on the property. Your uncle had no other immediate family, and your siblings have already declined their inheritance rights due to the property's condition and potential liabilities. Of course they had. Matt's older brother Tom and sister Julie had both built successful careers in finance. They wouldn't want to deal with a rundown garage and whatever problems came with it. That's why it landed on Matt, the brother who currently had nothing to lose. I'll need to see the property before making any decisions, Matt said. Certainly. I should mention that the city has been pressuring for the property to be cleaned up or demolished. The neighbors have filed several complaints about its appearance. I can meet you there tomorrow morning if you'd like. After hanging up, Matt found Emma watching him with cautious curiosity. Uncle Roy died? She asked. Apparently. I barely knew him, to be honest. He left me some kind of garage, but it sounds like it's more trouble than it's worth. Emma pulled out her phone and began typing. Within minutes, she'd found the property on Street View. The image showed a squat, industrial building with peeling paint, broken windows, and a yard full of what looked like scrap metal and abandoned machinery. Tom and Julie passed on this? She asked, showing him the screen. Smart of them, probably. Look at that place. But Emma was studying the image more carefully, zooming in on different sections. Dad, look at the size of that building, and see these shapes in the yard. Some of this stuff looks like it might actually be cars under all those tarps and rust. Matt looked closer. She was right beneath the weathered covers and accumulated debris. There were definitely vehicles scattered throughout the property. Old ones, by the look of their shapes. Even if they are cars, Emma, look at the condition of everything. This place is what people politely call a fixer-upper and honestly call a money pit. Maybe, she said, but her voice carried the first note of genuine interest he'd heard in months. Or maybe Uncle Roy was one of those collector types who like to hide treasures in plain sight. The next morning, Matt and Emma drove across town to Sycamore Street, following Patricia Henderson's silver sedan. The neighborhood had seen better days, a mix of small industrial buildings and aging residential properties, the kind of area where people minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions. The garage looked worse in person than in the photos. The main building was constructed of concrete blocks, painted an industrial green that had faded to the color of old moss. Several windows were boarded up, and the roll-up bay doors sagged on their tracks. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, though sections had been cut or had fallen over entirely. Well, Patricia Henderson said diplomatically, your uncle certainly lived a private life. Emma walked to the fence line, peering through the gaps at the covered shapes scattered throughout the yard. How long did he own this place? According to the records, about 30 years. He purchased it from a trucking company that went out of business. The neighbors say he kept to himself, worked mostly at night, and rarely had visitors. As Patricia unlocked the main building and began explaining the legal details, Matt found himself drawn to one particular covered shape near the back of the yard. Something about its proportions looked familiar, though he couldn't place why. The tarp covering it was secured with bungee cords and had probably been white once, though years of weather had turned it grey-green. The building has good bones, Patricia was saying, but it needs a new roof, updated electrical and environmental testing for any automotive chemicals that might have been stored improperly. Matt half listened, still staring at the covered shape. Emma had noticed his distraction and followed his gaze. Want to look under there? She asked quietly. Before he could answer, she was already working at the bungee cords, her nimble fingers making quick work of the weathered elastic. The tarp came away in sections, revealing first a chrome bumper that gleamed despite the dust. then distinctive twin racing stripes, and finally the unmistakable silhouette of a classic muscle car. "Dad," Emma whispered, "I think we need to have a longer conversation with Uncle Roy's lawyer." As Matt stared at the pristine 1967 Shelby Cobra nestled in this forgotten corner of the world, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, the blueprint for his life wasn't finished after all. The 1967 Shelby GT 500 Super Snake sat before them like a sleeping giant, its Wimbledon white paint gleaming beneath decades of careful preservation. Matt had seen pictures of these cars in magazines, but holding the keys in his trembling hands felt surreal. This wasn't just any muscle car, this was automotive royalty, one of only two ever built. "Dad, are you seeing this?" Emma's voice carried a reverence he hadn't heard since she was little, discovering something magical for the first time. Patricia Henderson approached cautiously, her professional composure cracking as she took in the vehicle's immaculate condition. "Your uncle never mentioned anything about collector cars in our meetings. I assumed the covered vehicles were just old projects or scrap." Matt circled the Shelby slowly, noting details that spoke of meticulous care. The engine bay spotless beneath its hood, chrome components polished to mirror finish. Even the tires properly inflated and showing minimal wear despite their obvious age. Someone had loved this machine. "The paperwork," he said suddenly. "There has to be documentation, registration, something that proves ownership and authenticity." Emma was already exploring the car's interior, running her fingers along the original black vinyl seats. "Dad, look at this." She held up a leather portfolio that had been tucked behind the driver's seat. Inside were photographs, registration documents, and what appeared to be a detailed maintenance log spanning decades. The photographs told a story Matt hadn't expected. Uncle Roy, looking 20 years younger, standing beside the Shelby at various car shows and racing events. In one image, he wore a racing suit and held a trophy, grinning beside the car in what looked like a winner's circle. Other photos showed different vehicles, classics Matt didn't recognize, but which clearly belonged to the same careful owner. "He was a racer," Emma said, studying a photograph of Roy behind the wheel, his face intense with concentration as he navigated what looked like a professional track. Patricia examined the registration documents. "These appear legitimate. The title is clear, in your uncle's name since 1978. If this vehicle is authentic, and it certainly appears to be, we're looking at something quite valuable." Matt's engineering mind kicked in, the analytical part of him that had been dormant for months suddenly awakening. "We need to verify everything. Authenticity, condition, market value. This could change our entire situation." "Or it could be too good to be true," Emma said, though her tone suggested she hoped otherwise. "Dad, what if there are more? What if Uncle Roy was collecting cars this whole time, and nobody knew?" The possibility hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Matt looked across the cluttered yard, seeing the covered shapes with new eyes. Where before he'd seen junk and problems, now he saw potential. Each tarp might hide another treasure, another piece of Uncle Roy's secret life. "We should look at everything," he decided. "Systematically, document what we find before making any decisions." They spent the next hour uncovering vehicles with the methodical precision of archaeologists. Each discovery brought new surprises: a 1970 Plymouth Cuda in pristine plum crazy purple, a 1969 Dodge Charger RT with its original 446-pack engine, a 1968 Mustang GT 390 fastback that looked like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. Emma kept a running list on her phone, photographing each vehicle and its documentation. Her excitement grew with each discovery, and Matt watched his daughter transform before his eyes. The sullen teenager who counted grocery money had been replaced by an engaged young woman with bright eyes and animated gestures. "This is incredible, Dad. Do you realize what we're looking at here? These aren't just old cars, they're pieces of automotive history. Some of these models are so rare that museums would fight over them." Patricia Henderson had long since abandoned any pretense of professional detachment. She moved between vehicles like a tourist in an unexpected wonderland, occasionally calling colleagues to describe what they were seeing. "Mr. Colburn," she said as they uncovered their seventh vehicle, "I need to be frank with you. I've been handling estate law for 20 years, and I've never encountered anything like this. We're looking at a collection that could be worth millions of dollars. This changes the entire nature of your inheritance." The weight of her words settled over Matt like a heavy blanket. Millions of dollars, enough to pay off their debts, secure Emma's college education, maybe even start fresh somewhere new. But even as the financial possibilities danced through his mind, he found himself thinking about something else. The pride in Emma's voice as she discussed engine specifications and restoration techniques, the way she'd instinctively understood the care these vehicles represented. "We need to be careful," he said finally. "Word about this can't get out until we understand exactly what we're dealing with. Legal ownership, insurance, security. There are too many variables to rush into anything." Emma nodded seriously. "And we need to learn about Uncle Roy. How did he acquire all this? Was he a dealer, a collector, or just incredibly lucky? The more we understand about his story, the better we can protect what he left us." As they prepared to leave, Matt took one last look at the Shelby Super Snake. In the afternoon light, with dust motes dancing around its perfect lines, the car seemed to promise something beyond mere wealth. It promised purpose, a project that could bring him and Emma together in ways he hadn't imagined possible. "Dad," Emma's voice interrupted his thoughts. "I know we have to be practical about this, but I hope we don't just sell everything right away. Some of these cars, they're not just valuable because of money, they're valuable because of what they represent. Uncle Roy spent his whole life preserving these pieces of history. Maybe we should think about continuing that work." Matt smiled, recognizing Sarah's influence in their daughter's words. His wife had always seen beyond the surface of things, understanding that some treasures couldn't be measured in dollars alone. "Let's take it one step at a time," he said. "First, we figure out exactly what we've inherited. Then we decide what Uncle Roy would have wanted us to do with it." As they drove home in Patricia's sedan, the garage shrinking in the rearview mirror, Matt felt a cautious optimism beginning to bloom in his chest. For the first time in months, he and Emma had shared genuine excitement about something. They'd worked as a team, combining his analytical approach with her intuitive understanding of the car's significance. The Shelby GT500 Super Snake had been more than just their first discovery. It had been a catalyst, transforming a burden into an adventure, and a father-daughter relationship that had been strained by hardship into something that might, with patience and care, become stronger than ever. That evening, as Emma researched classic car values on her laptop and Matt studied Uncle Roy's maintenance logs, their modest kitchen felt different. The overdue bills still sat in their neat piles, but they no longer seemed like insurmountable obstacles. They'd become temporary inconveniences, problems with solutions that might be sitting under tarps in a forgotten garage across town. "Dad," Emma said, looking up from her screen, "I think we're going to need to learn a lot about cars very quickly." Matt nodded, already thinking about the technical manuals he'd need to study, the experts he'd need to consult, the careful planning required to handle their inheritance responsibly. It felt good to have complex problems to solve again, even if they were nothing like the engineering challenges he'd faced before. "I think you're right," he said, "but you know what? I think we're up for it." The hand-drawn racing circuit maps were tucked inside a manila envelope that had yellowed with age, hidden beneath a stack of Motor Trend magazines from the 1970s. Emma discovered them on their third day of systematic exploration, when she'd ventured behind what appeared to be a false wall in Uncle Roy's office space. "Dad, you need to see this," she called from the cramped room that had been carved out of the garage's corner. Matt squeezed through the narrow doorway, surprised by the hidden sanctuary his uncle had created. Unlike the cluttered garage bay, this space was organized with military precision. Filing cabinets lined one wall, a drafting table occupied the center, and photographs covered every available surface. The maps Emma held were masterworks of detail, each circuit drawn by hand with precise measurements and notations. They weren't official track layouts, but something far more intriguing, underground racing circuits with names like Midnight Mile and Devil's Triangle, complete with escape routes and safety protocols marked in Roy's careful handwriting. "These aren't legal racing venues," Matt observed, studying the intricate details. "Look at these notes about police patrol patterns and lookout positions." Emma spread another map across the drafting table. This one's dated 1974, and it shows a circuit that runs through the old industrial district. Dad, Uncle Roy wasn't just collecting cars, he was actively racing them in some kind of underground scene. The photographs on the walls began to make more sense in this context. Roy wasn't just posing with cars at sanctioned events. He was documenting a hidden world of illegal street racing that operated in the shadows of their city. Images showed dozens of different vehicles, many of which Matt now recognized as cars currently sitting under tarps in the garage. "Mr. Colburn?" A gravelly voice called from the main garage bay. "Sorry to interrupt, but your door was open." Matt emerged to find an elderly Hispanic man in oil-stained coveralls, his weathered hands holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. Despite his age, probably late 70s, the man carried himself with the confident bearing of someone who'd spent his life working with his hands. "I'm Frank Martinez," the man said, extending a calloused hand. "I live next door, been Roy's neighbor for about 15 years, wanted to pay my respects and see how you folks were making out with this place." "I'm Matt, Roy's nephew. This is my daughter Emma. We're still trying to figure out exactly what my uncle left us." Frank's eyes crinkled with what might have been amusement. "Roy was a private man, but we talked cars sometimes over the fence. He mentioned you once or twice, said you were an engineer like him, back in his younger days." "Roy was an engineer?" Matt asked, surprised by this new information about his uncle. "Worked for Ford in the 60s, according to him. Specialized in performance modifications and racing applications before he went independent. That's how he got connected to the collector circuit, though I suspect there was more to it than just collecting." Frank moved toward one of the covered vehicles with the familiarity of someone who'd seen them before. "Mind if I take a look? Been curious about some of these beauties for years." Emma quickly joined them as Frank pulled back a tarp to reveal a midnight blue 1969 Boss 429 Mustang. His inspection was thorough and knowledgeable, checking details that spoke of deep automotive expertise. "Factory correct in every detail?" he murmured approvingly. Roy knew his stuff. "This isn't just a restored car, it's been maintained in museum-quality condition." "Frank," Matt said carefully, "did you know about Roy's involvement in racing? We found some maps and photographs that suggest he was part of an underground scene." The older man's expression grew thoughtful. "Underground's a strong word, but yeah, Roy was connected to people who appreciated cars the way they were meant to be appreciated. Not just sitting in garages looking pretty, but actually being driven hard and fast." Emma leaned forward eagerly. "What kind of people? Other collectors? Engineers, mostly, like Roy. Guys who worked for the major manufacturers, but couldn't always express their ideas through official channels. They'd modify cars on weekends, test new concepts, push the boundaries of what was possible with American muscle. Some of it was legal, some of it existed in gray areas." Frank's explanation painted a picture of Uncle Roy that was far more complex than the reclusive man Matt remembered from family gatherings. This was someone who'd been part of an automotive underground, preserving and developing cars that pushed the limits of factory specifications. "The thing about Roy," Frank continued, "was that he understood these cars weren't just machines. They were expressions of American engineering at its most creative. He saw himself as a curator, keeping alive the spirit of innovation that built the muscle car era." As they talked, Emma had wandered back to the office space and emerged with more discoveries: technical manuals with Roy's handwritten modifications, correspondence with other collectors, and what appeared to be detailed provenance documentation for each vehicle. "Dad, look at this," she said, showing him a leather-bound ledger. Uncle Roy documented everything: where he acquired each car, what modifications were made, maintenance history, even the stories behind why each vehicle was significant. The ledger revealed the scope of Roy's network. He hadn't just collected randomly, but had targeted specific vehicles with historical importance: factory prototypes, race-proven cars, and one-off modifications that represented pivotal moments in automotive development. "This one entry is fascinating," Emma continued. "He acquired the Shelby from the estate of a Ford test driver who'd used it for high-speed evaluations in the Nevada desert. It wasn't just a show car, it was a working development vehicle." Frank nodded approvingly. "That sounds like Roy. He wasn't interested in trailer queens that never saw action. Every car in this collection was chosen because it had a story worth preserving." As the afternoon progressed, Matt found himself increasingly impressed by his uncle's methodical approach. The man had been a serious curator, not just a hobbyist with deep pockets. Each vehicle represented a piece of automotive history that might otherwise have been lost. "Frank," Matt said, "would you be willing to help us understand what we've inherited? It's clear you know a lot about cars, and we need expert guidance." The older man's face brightened. "Nothing would make me happier. Roy was a good neighbor, and he'd want these beauties to be properly cared for. Besides," he added with a grin, "I've been wondering about some of these cars for years. This is like getting access to a private museum." Emma pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. "I'm finding online forums where people discuss missing legendary vehicles. Dad, some of these cars that Uncle Roy preserved, people in the collector community think they were destroyed or lost decades ago." As they stood in the garage, surrounded by automotive history, Matt felt a growing sense of responsibility. This wasn't just a financial windfall, it was a legacy that his uncle had spent decades building, a collection that preserved important pieces of American manufacturing heritage. The racing circuit maps had revealed Uncle Roy as more than a collector. He'd been a participant in automotive culture, someone who understood that cars were meant to be experienced, not just admired. Now Matt and Emma faced the challenge of honoring that legacy while dealing with the practical realities of ownership. "We need to learn everything we can about Uncle Roy's world," Matt decided. "The history, the community, the significance of what he preserved. If we're going to be worthy custodians of this collection, we need to understand what it really represents." The prototype engine block sat like a metallic sculpture in the corner of Roy's workshop, its unusual configuration immediately catching Matt's trained eye. Unlike the familiar Vate layouts he recognized, this power plant featured an experimental design with offset cylinders and what appeared to be variable compression ratios built into the block casting itself. "This is incredible," Emma breathed, running her fingers along the precisely machined surfaces. "Dad, look at these cooling passages. They're nothing like conventional designs." Matt knelt beside the engine, his engineering background allowing him to appreciate the sophisticated metallurgy and innovative thinking that had gone into its creation. Serial numbers and casting marks indicated Ford origins, but the configuration was unlike anything he'd seen in production vehicles. Frank Martinez examined the engine with the reverence of someone encountering a long-lost treasure. "I remember Roy mentioning this beauty. He said it came from a Ford skunkworks project in the early 70s, something they were developing for IMSA racing before the oil crisis killed most performance programs." Emma had already photographed every angle of the engine and was cross-referencing the serial numbers with online databases. "Dad, I'm not finding any matches for these part numbers. This might be a completely unique prototype." The implications sent a thrill through Matt's analytical mind. Prototype engines from major manufacturers were extraordinarily rare, especially ones that represented abandoned technological paths. This wasn't just a collector's item, it was industrial archaeology, a glimpse into automotive development that had never reached production. "Frank," Matt asked, "do you know the story behind how Roy acquired this?" The older man's expression grew thoughtful. "Roy was careful about details like that, but I got the impression he'd helped some Ford engineers preserve things that would otherwise have been scrapped when projects got cancelled. Corporate accountants saw expensive failures, but Roy saw innovation worth preserving." As they explored deeper into the workshop, more mysteries emerged. Emma discovered technical drawings tucked behind the engine, blueprints that showed the power plant installed in various chassis configurations. Roy hadn't just preserved the engine, he'd been studying it, understanding its potential applications. "Look at this," she said, spreading the drawings across a workbench. Uncle Roy was designing installations for different vehicles. This diagram shows the engine mounted in what looks like a Trans Am, and this one appears to be a Mustang application. Matt studied the precise draftsmanship, recognizing the work of someone who understood both theoretical engineering and practical implementation. "Your uncle wasn't just a collector, Emma. He was an active researcher, trying to understand the full potential of what he'd preserved." The revelation transformed Matt's perception of their inheritance. They weren't just dealing with valuable cars, they were custodians of a research collection that documented paths not taken in American automotive development. Frank began sharing stories that painted Roy as a central figure in an informal network of engineers and enthusiasts. who preserved automotive innovations that had been abandoned for economic rather than technical reasons. These men had worked within the system during their professional careers, but continued exploring possibilities in their private time. Roy used to say that the muscle car era ended just when things were getting really interesting. Frank recalled, government regulations and insurance costs killed the party before engineers could fully explore what was possible with American Vate technology. Emma's research had expanded beyond simple identification to understanding the broader context of Roy's collection. She'd found references to similar preservation efforts by retired engineers at other manufacturers, suggesting Roy was part of a larger movement to maintain automotive knowledge that corporate America was abandoning. "Dad, this is bigger than we thought," she said, showing him forum discussions about missing prototypes and cancelled projects. "There's a whole community of people who study these abandoned automotive technologies. Some of the engines and modifications that Uncle Roy preserved are legendary among enthusiasts." The growing complexity of their inheritance began to weigh on Matt. Each new discovery brought additional responsibilities and questions about proper stewardship. They were dealing with history, not just valuable assets. "We need professional guidance," he decided. "Automotive historians, museum curators, people who understand the significance of what Roy preserved." Frank nodded approvingly. Roy would want that. He always said these cars and components shouldn't disappear into private collections where nobody could learn from them. He believed in sharing knowledge, even if he was private about his activities. As afternoon faded into evening, they secured the garage and prepared to leave. Emma carried photocopies of Roy's technical drawings, her excitement about the discoveries evident in her animated discussion of compression ratios and cooling system innovations. "Dad," she said as they walked to their car, "I've been thinking about something. You know how you've been struggling to find work as an engineer?" Matt nodded, wondering where her thoughts were leading. "What if this isn't just about inheriting money? What if Uncle Roy left us something more valuable, a project that could use your skills in a completely different way? These cars and engines represent engineering problems that were never fully solved. Maybe there's opportunity here, beyond just selling everything." The suggestion resonated with possibilities Matt hadn't considered. Instead of viewing the collection purely as financial salvation, Emma was proposing they engage with it intellectually, treating Roy's work as the beginning of their own journey rather than simply its conclusion. "You mean like restoration and research?" he asked. "More than that. Documentation, education, maybe even completing some of the projects Uncle Roy started. Look at that prototype engine. What if we could understand its full potential? What if we could share that knowledge with the automotive community?" Frank, who had been listening quietly, smiled broadly. "Emma, your uncle would have loved hearing those words. Roy always said the real value of his collection wasn't in dollars. It was in the stories and innovations that would be lost forever if someone didn't care enough to preserve them properly." As they drove home, Matt found himself considering Emma's proposal seriously. For months, he'd been looking for employment that would utilize his engineering skills. Perhaps the answer wasn't finding a traditional job, but creating meaningful work around Roy's legacy. "Emma," he said finally, "if we were going to approach this as more than just an inheritance to liquidate, what would be the first steps?" His daughter's response was immediate and well considered. "Research everything thoroughly. Document the significance of each vehicle and component. Connect with the automotive history community. Maybe start a blog or YouTube channel to share what we're learning. Turn Uncle Roy's private research into educational content." The prototype engine had become more than just another valuable discovery. It represented the intersection of engineering, innovation, and historical preservation, offering them a path forward that honored both Roy's legacy and their own need for purpose and financial stability. That evening, as Emma researched automotive history programs at nearby universities and Matt reviewed Roy's technical documentation, their kitchen table became a planning center for an adventure neither had anticipated. The mysterious prototype engine sat at the heart of their evolving understanding of what they'd inherited, promising challenges and discoveries that would test everything they thought they knew about cars, family, and the value of preserving innovation for future generations. The Racing Syndicate membership ring was tucked inside a small velvet box that Emma discovered while organizing Roy's personal effects from his office desk. The heavy gold band bore an intricate insignia, a stylized eagle with wings spread over crossed pistons, surrounding the letters NVRS in elaborate script. "Dad, look at this," Emma called, holding the ring up to catch the afternoon light, streaming through the garage windows. The craftsmanship was exceptional, clearly custom-made for someone who valued both automotive symbolism and subtle luxury. Matt examined the ring carefully, noting the weight and quality of the gold, the precise engraving work, and most intriguingly, the wear patterns that suggested regular use over many years. This wasn't jewelry that had sat in a drawer. Roy had worn this ring with pride. NVRS, he mused. Any idea what that might stand for? Frank Martinez, who had become their unofficial guide to Roy's world, studied the ring with growing recognition. "Nevada Racing Syndicate," he said quietly. I wondered if Roy had been connected to those folks. Emma immediately pulled out her phone, but Frank shook his head. "You won't find much about NVRS online, Emma. They were an exclusive group engineers, wealthy collectors, and professional drivers who organized private racing events in the Nevada desert during the 70s and 80s. "Illegal racing?" Matt asked. "Not exactly illegal, but not sanctioned either. They owned large tracts of private land in remote areas where they could test high-performance vehicles without interference from authorities or insurance companies. Think of it as automotive research with a competitive edge." Frank's explanation painted a picture of Roy's involvement that was far more sophisticated than simple street racing. The Nevada Racing Syndicate sounded like an exclusive club where serious automotive enthusiasts could explore the limits of performance technology away from public scrutiny. "The membership was invitation only," Frank continued. "You had to bring something significant to the table, either engineering expertise, access to experimental vehicles, or substantial financial backing for research projects." Roy qualified on multiple counts. Emma had found Roy's appointment calendar from 1976 and was studying entries that now made more sense in this context. "Dad, look at these notations. Nevada test, July 15-18 and NVRS annual, September 22-25. These weren't just social gatherings. The calendar entries, combined with the racing circuit maps they'd discovered earlier, suggested Roy had been a regular participant in organized events that blended competitive driving with automotive development. This wasn't the underground racing world Matt had initially imagined, but something more professional and scientific. "What happened to the syndicate?" Emma asked. Frank's expression grew somber. "Insurance costs killed most private racing by the late 80s. The legal liability for high-speed events became too expensive, even for wealthy participants. Most of the members moved on to sanctioned racing or focused exclusively on collecting. As they continued exploring Roy's papers, evidence of his NVRS involvement became clearer. They found correspondence with other members, technical reports from testing sessions, and photographs from events that looked more like automotive research conferences than typical racing gatherings. "Look at this letter," Emma said, reading from a document dated 1979. "It's from someone at Chrysler, thanking Roy for data from high-altitude testing of a prototype engine." "Dad, Uncle Roy wasn't just participating in these events, he was contributing technical research that manufacturers were using." The revelation elevated Roy's status from hobbyist to serious researcher, someone whose private testing provided valuable data to professional automotive development programs. His NVRS membership represented recognition from peers who valued his expertise and contributions. Matt studied photographs from NVRS events, noting the sophisticated timing equipment, data logging systems, and professional-grade safety measures evident in the background. These weren't street racing gatherings, but serious automotive research sessions conducted under controlled conditions. "Frank," he asked, "are any other NVRS members still active? People who might remember Roy's work and could help us understand the significance of his collection." "Possibly. The automotive community is smaller than you might think, especially among people who were active in the 70s and 80s. Roy mentioned staying in touch with some of his old racing associates, though he was always discreet about specific names." Emma had been researching automotive history forums and discovered references to NVRS vehicles and testing data that had influenced production car development. Roy's involvement placed him at the center of informal research networks that had shaped American muscle car evolution. "Dad, "This changes how we should think about the collection," she said. "These aren't just valuable cars, they're research vehicles that contributed to automotive development. Some of the modifications and testing data Uncle Roy preserved might still be valuable to current engineers." The possibility intrigued Matt's engineering sensibilities. Modern automotive development could potentially benefit from understanding the experimental approaches and data that Roy's generation had developed through private research. As they prepared to leave the garage that evening, Matt found himself wearing Roy's NVRS ring, the weight feeling appropriate on his finger. Emma had noticed and smiled approvingly. "It looks right on you," she said. "Maybe you're meant to continue what Uncle Roy started." That night, Matt dreamed of Nevada desert highways and high-performance engines, of his uncle as a younger man pushing experimental vehicles to their limits while contributing to the advancement of automotive technology. The Racing Syndicate membership ring had revealed Roy as more than a collector. He'd been an active participant in automotive innovation, someone who understood that preserving the past was only meaningful if it informed the future. The NVRS connection also explained the quality and significance of Roy's collection. These weren't randomly acquired vehicles, but carefully chosen examples that had played roles in automotive development, preserved by someone who understood their historical and technical importance. "Emma," Matt said over breakfast the next morning, "what would you think about trying to contact other former NVRS members? Not for financial advice, but to understand the full scope of what Roy was involved in." His daughter's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "I was hoping you'd suggest that. If we're going to be proper custodians of Uncle Roy's legacy, we need to understand the community he was part of and the significance of his contributions to automotive history." The Racing Syndicate membership ring had become their key to understanding Roy's true place in automotive culture, not just as a preservationist, but as an active researcher whose private work had contributed to the development of American performance vehicles during their most innovative period. Sarah's mechanic tools were hidden beneath a canvas tarp in the far corner of the garage, so carefully preserved that they might have been put away yesterday instead of years ago. Emma discovered them while searching for additional documentation about the prototype engine, her gasp of recognition drawing Matt immediately to her side. The tool chest was a beautiful Craftsman unit from the early 2000s, its red finish still gleaming despite years of storage. As Emma opened each drawer with reverent care, they revealed a complete collection of automotive tools, each piece maintained in perfect condition and arranged with the methodical precision that had characterized everything Sarah did. "Mum had these," Emma whispered, lifting a torque wrench with familiar care. "I never knew she worked on cars." Matt stared at the tools with growing amazement and a deep ache of memory. Sarah had been secretive about so many things during their courtship, playfully mysterious about her interests and background. He'd known she was mechanically inclined. She could fix anything in their house with remarkable skill, but he'd never connected her practical abilities to serious automotive knowledge. "Your mother was full of surprises," he said softly, remembering conversations that now took on new meaning. Sarah's ability to diagnose car problems by sound, her comfort discussing engine specifications, her occasional comments about restoration projects she'd like to tackle someday. All the clues had been there, but he'd been too focused on other aspects of their relationship to piece them together. Frank Martinez approached the tool chest with obvious respect. "These are professional-grade tools, not hobbyist equipment. Whoever owned these was serious about automotive work." He paused, studying Matt's expression. "Your wife?" "Apparently so. Emma, do you remember your mother ever talking about working on cars?" Emma was examining a specialized tool designed for adjusting carburetors, her face thoughtful. "Not directly, but she always knew more about our cars than seemed normal. Remember how she could tell when something was wrong just by listening to the engine, and she never seemed intimidated by taking things apart to fix them." As they explored the tool collection more thoroughly, they found evidence of Sarah's automotive interests carefully preserved alongside the equipment. A logbook documented various repair and restoration projects, written in her familiar handwriting. Photographs tucked into the tool chest showed a younger Sarah working on classic cars, her face bright with concentration and joy. "Dad, look at this," Emma said, holding up a photograph that stopped Matt's heart. Sarah, probably in her early 20s, stood beside a partially restored 1969 Camaro SS, wrench in hand and grease smudged across her cheek. Her smile was radiant, the expression of someone doing exactly what she loved. "She looks so happy," Emma observed, studying her mother's face in the photograph. Matt nodded, unable to speak for a moment. This was Sarah before he'd known her, pursuing passions he'd never suspected. The realization brought both joy at this new discovery and sadness for opportunities lost, conversations they'd never had, projects they might have shared, dreams he'd never known she harbored. Frank was examining other photographs, his expression growing more interested. "Matt, I think your wife knew Roy better than you realized. Look at this image. They're both working on the same vehicle." The photograph Frank held showed Sarah and Roy collaborating on engine work, both focused intently on their task. The easy familiarity between them suggested this wasn't their first shared project. In the background, Matt could see the interior of Roy's garage, looking much as it did now but more active, with multiple projects in various stages of completion. "They work together," Emma said, understanding dawning in her voice. "Mom and Uncle Roy shared automotive interests. That's probably how she met him, through cars rather than family connections." The logbook confirmed Emma's insight. Sarah's entries documented not just her solo projects, but collaborative work with Roy on various restorations and modifications. Her handwriting revealed technical knowledge that impressed even Matt's engineering background, detailed notes about engine specifications, suspension modifications, and performance tuning approaches. "Listen to this entry," Emma read from the logbook. "Roy thinks the Camaro's rear suspension geometry could be improved with custom trailing arms. We discussed fabrication approaches and decided to start with computer modeling before cutting metal. The goal is improved handling without sacrificing ride quality for daily driving." Matt felt a complex mix of emotions as he absorbed this new understanding of his wife. Pride in her obvious expertise, regret for not recognizing her interests sooner, and a growing appreciation for the depth of her relationship with Roy. She hadn't just been his sister-in-law, but his collaborator and fellow enthusiast. "Dad," Emma said gently, "I think this is why Uncle Roy left the garage to you specifically. It wasn't random or just family obligation. He knew Mom would have wanted you and me to continue what they started together." The insight felt profound and transformative. Matt had been viewing the garage inheritance as Roy's gesture toward a struggling nephew, but Emma's interpretation suggested something much deeper, a continuation of partnership that had been interrupted by Sarah's illness and death. Frank nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Roy was always careful about who he trusted with his projects. If he worked closely with your wife, he would have seen her passion for automotive preservation. Leaving the collection to your family honors that shared commitment." Emma was studying more photographs, finding images that documented Sarah's involvement in multiple restoration projects. "Dad, look at her face in these pictures. This is the same expression she'd get when she was fixing something around the house, completely absorbed, totally happy. Working on cars wasn't just a hobby for her, it was something that brought her real joy." Matt remembered that expression well. Sarah fixing the dishwasher, Sarah rewiring a lamp, Sarah patiently explaining to young Emma how mechanical systems worked. He'd appreciated her practical skills without understanding their deeper source in automotive passion. "She wanted to open a restoration shop," he said suddenly, the memory surfacing from years of burial beneath grief and daily responsibilities. After Emma started school, she talked about finding workspace where she could take on classic car projects. "I thought it was just daydreaming." "It wasn't daydreaming," Emma said firmly. "It was planning. And maybe Uncle Roy's garage was meant to be part of that plan." As they continued exploring Sarah's tools and documentation, the garage began to feel different, less like an inherited burden, and more like a sacred trust. Roy hadn't just collected cars, he'd preserved Sarah's dreams, along with automotive history. "Frank," Matt asked, "did Roy ever mention Sarah's restoration plans?" "He did, actually. Said she had exceptional instincts for bringing classic cars back to life without losing their original character. Roy was particular about restoration philosophy. He believed in preserving authenticity while improving reliability and safety." Emma found Sarah's notebook of restoration projects she'd hoped to tackle, complete with detailed plans for acquiring, restoring, and selling classic vehicles. The business plan was thorough and professionally conceived, revealing Sarah's serious intention to turn her automotive passion into a sustainable enterprise. Dad, she'd researched everything: market values, restoration costs, potential customer base, even legal requirements for operating an automotive business. This wasn't casual interest. This was a carefully planned career change. Matt felt a deep sadness for dreams that had been cut short by cancer, but also a growing sense of possibility. Perhaps Sarah's interrupted plans could be realized through their stewardship of Roy's collection. The garage could become what she'd envisioned, a place where classic cars received expert care and returned to active life. What if we approach this as continuing Mom's work, rather than just preserving Uncle Roy's collection? Emma suggested. We could restore cars properly, maintain the historical significance, but also make them available for people to experience and enjoy. The concept appealed to Matt's engineering sensibilities while honoring both Sarah's dreams and Roy's preservation efforts. Instead of viewing the collection as static museum pieces, they could treat them as living history that deserved to be maintained and occasionally driven. Frank smiled approvingly. Sarah would have loved that approach. She always said cars were meant to be experienced, not just admired. Roy felt the same way. He drove his vehicles regularly, kept them in running condition, treated them as functional art rather than static displays. As they prepared to lock up the garage that evening, Matt carried Sarah's favorite wrench, a well-worn combination tool that showed years of careful use. Emma walked beside him with her mother's restoration notebook, already making plans for research and learning opportunities. "Dad," she said as they reached their car, "I know this is complicated emotionally. Finding out about Mom's automotive interests must bring up a lot of feelings." Matt nodded, appreciating his daughter's sensitivity. "It does. I wish I'd understood her interests better when she was alive, but I'm also grateful to learn this about her now, and to understand why Roy trusted us with his life's work." "Maybe that's the point," Emma said wisely. "We can't change the past, but we can honor it by doing something meaningful with what we've learned. Mom's tools and Uncle Roy's cars, they're both asking us to keep their dreams alive." The discovery of Sarah's mechanic tools had transformed their understanding of the garage inheritance from coincidental legacy to deliberate trust. They weren't just random beneficiaries of Roy's collection, but chosen custodians of a shared automotive passion that connected wife and brother-in-law in ways Matt had never suspected. That night, Matt fell asleep thinking about Sarah's hands on those tools, her concentration as she worked on engines, her excitement about restoration projects that would bring classic cars back to life. The garage had become more than their salvation. It had become their connection to dreams that deserved completion, love that demanded expression, and heritage that required preservation for future generations who would appreciate the artistry of American automotive innovation. The hidden safety deposit box key was tucked inside the Shelby's glove compartment, wrapped in a small piece of leather that had protected it from decades of temperature changes and humidity. Emma discovered it while documenting the car's original accessories, her fingers finding the unusual shape buried beneath owner's manuals and maintenance records. "Dad, this looks important," she said, unwrapping the key to reveal a brass tag marked with the logo of First National Bank and a box number, 347. Matt examined the key with growing curiosity. Roy had been methodical about everything else. Why would he hide a safety deposit box key in a car rather than keeping it with his other important documents? "Frank, did Roy ever mention having a safety deposit box?" Matt asked. The older man shook his head. Roy was pretty private about his financial arrangements, but this suggests he had something he considered especially valuable or sensitive stored away from the garage. Within an hour, they were sitting in the sterile office of First National Bank, facing a manager who had verified Matt's inheritance rights and was preparing to escort them to the safety deposit box area. The anticipation was palpable as they followed her through multiple security doors into the vault's quiet interior. Box 347 was larger than Matt had expected, requiring both his key and the bank's master key to open. Inside, instead of expected documents like insurance policies or financial records, they found a thick manila folder marked Confidential, R. Medina, in Roy's careful handwriting. The first document in the folder stopped Matt cold, an official FBI letterhead dated 15 years earlier, thanking Roy for his invaluable cooperation in Operation Chrome Horse. which resulted in the recovery of significant stolen automotive assets and the prosecution of individuals involved in classic car fraud networks. "Dad," Emma whispered, reading over his shoulder, "Uncle Roy was working with the FBI?" As they examined more documents, an extraordinary story emerged. Roy hadn't been simply collecting classic cars. He'd been serving as a federal informant and asset recovery specialist, using his expertise and connections to identify stolen vehicles and fraudulent restorations that were being sold to unsuspecting collectors. The files documented Roy's role in exposing a sophisticated network of criminals who specialized in stealing historically significant vehicles, creating fraudulent documentation, and selling them to wealthy collectors who believed they were acquiring legitimate automotive treasures. "Look at this list," Matt said, studying a document that catalogued over 40 vehicles Roy had helped identify as stolen property. Some of these cars were thought to be lost forever, but they were actually hidden by thieves who planned to wait years or decades before selling them with fabricated provenance. Emma found photographs showing some of their garage's current inventory, but with different documentation and claimed histories. The images had been taken as evidence in various fraud cases, proving that vehicles now in Roy's possession had once been stolen property. "The cars in our garage," she said slowly, understanding dawning. "They're not just valuable collections. They're recovered stolen property that Uncle Roy helped the FBI reclaim." Frank, who had been quietly reading additional documents, looked up with amazement. According to this file, Roy worked for over 20 years, helping federal agents identify automotive fraud. He wasn't just a collector, he was a specialized law enforcement asset. The revelation recontextualized everything they'd discovered about Roy's activities. His involvement with the Nevada Racing Syndicate, his extensive network of automotive contacts, his methodical documentation of each vehicle's history, all of it had served his role as someone who could identify authentic versus fraudulent classic cars. This explains why he was so secretive, Matt realized. Working with federal agents to expose car theft rings would have put him in danger if the wrong people learned about his cooperation. Emma found documentation showing that Roy had often served as the safe custodian of recovered vehicles while their ownership was being legally resolved. Some cars had been returned to their rightful owners, while others had been awarded to Roy in recognition of his assistance in their recovery. "Dad, look at this court order from 8 years ago. Uncle Roy was given legal title to 12 vehicles as compensation for his work, helping solve a major classic car theft case. The judge specifically noted his extraordinary service to automotive heritage preservation. The files contained dozens of similar documents, court orders, FBI commendations, and legal opinions that established Roy's role as more than just an informant. He'd been a specialized expert whose knowledge of automotive history and manufacturing details made him invaluable in identifying fraudulent vehicles and documentation. This changes everything about how we should view the collection," Matt said. "These aren't just valuable cars Roy accumulated, they're pieces of automotive history that he rescued from criminals and preserved for the legitimate collector community." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "It also explains why Roy was so particular about documentation and provenance. He understood the difference between authentic automotive history and clever fraud better than almost anyone." As they continued reading, they discovered that Roy's work had extended beyond simple vehicle identification. He'd helped develop FBI protocols for automotive fraud investigation, trained federal agents in classic car authentication techniques, and served as an expert witness in dozens of prosecutions. "Listen to this letter from the FBI director," Emma read. "Mr. Medina's contributions to federal automotive crime investigation have been exceptional. His expertise has resulted in the recovery of over 50 million in stolen classic vehicles and the successful prosecution of 17 major fraud networks." The magnitude of Roy's impact on automotive crime fighting was staggering. He'd been a key figure in protecting the classic car community from sophisticated criminal enterprises, using his passion for automotive history to serve justice and preserve legitimate heritage. "Dad," Emma said quietly, "we're not just inheriting a car collection, we're inheriting the responsibility of continuing Uncle Roy's work, protecting automotive history from criminals and fraudsters." Matt felt the weight of this revelation settling over him. The garage wasn't just valuable property, it was a legacy of service to the automotive community, a testament to one man's commitment to preserving authentic history against those who would corrupt it for profit. "The question now," he said, "is whether we're equipped to continue Roy's work, or whether we should transfer this responsibility to others who might be better qualified." Frank smiled knowingly. Roy didn't leave this collection to just anyone, Matt. He left it to someone he trusted, to understand its significance and continue protecting what he'd spent his life preserving. As they prepared to leave the bank with copies of Roy's files, Matt realized that their garage inheritance had transformed once again. They weren't just treasure hunters who'd stumbled onto valuable cars, nor were they simple collectors continuing a hobby. They were custodians of justice, inheritors of a mission to protect automotive heritage from those who would steal and corrupt it. The hidden safety deposit box key had revealed Roy's true legacy, not just as a collector or even as a preservationist, but as a guardian of automotive integrity whose life's work had protected countless pieces of history from criminal exploitation. Now that responsibility belonged to Matt and Emma, along with the knowledge, connections, and moral obligation to continue Roy's fight for automotive authenticity. The FBI case files spread across Matt's kitchen table told a story more complex and dangerous than anything he'd imagined when they first discovered Roy's collection. Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to their neighbor Mrs. Chen, had contacted them within hours of their bank visit, her arrival both validating Roy's federal cooperation and introducing new complications to their inheritance. "Your uncle was one of our most valuable automotive fraud specialists," Agent Chen explained, her professional demeanor softened by obvious respect for Roy's work. "His death has left a significant gap in our ability to authenticate recovered vehicles and identify sophisticated forgeries." Emma studied the case files with the systematic attention she'd inherited from both parents, making notes about patterns and connections that even impressed the federal agent. "Agent Chen, these theft networks, are they still active?" "Unfortunately, yes. Classic car fraud has become increasingly sophisticated as values have risen. We're currently tracking several major operations that specialize in stealing historically significant vehicles, creating fraudulent documentation, and selling them to collectors who believe they're acquiring legitimate pieces of automotive history." The revelation that Roy's death might have emboldened criminal networks added urgency to their decision-making about the collection's future. They weren't just inheriting valuable cars, but also responsibility for continuing Roy's protective work. Frank Martinez had been quietly reviewing technical documentation that Roy had created for federal investigations, his mechanical expertise helping him understand the sophisticated methods criminals use to disguise stolen vehicles. "These fraud operations are incredibly detailed," he observed. "They're not just changing VIN numbers, they're creating entire false histories for vehicles, complete with fabricated restoration records and fake provenance documentation." Agent Chen nodded grimly. "Your uncle's expertise in authentic restoration techniques and manufacturing details made him uniquely qualified to identify these sophisticated frauds. He could spot discrepancies that even experienced collectors might miss." Matt felt the weight of expectation settling over him. The FBI clearly hoped that Roy's family might continue his work, but the technical knowledge required seemed overwhelming. "Agent Chen, we're not automotive experts at Roy's level. How could we possibly continue his work?" "Actually, Mr. Colburn, your engineering background combined with Emma's research abilities and Frank's mechanical expertise might be more valuable than you realize." Roy didn't work alone. He was part of a network of specialists who each contributed different skills to fraud identification. Emma had been studying photographs of fraudulent vehicles that Roy had helped identify, comparing them to authentic examples in his collection. "Dad, look at this. The criminals aren't just creating fake cars, they're stealing real ones and modifying them to match different, more valuable models. This Mustang was originally a base model that thieves converted to appear like a rare Shelby variant." The sophistication of the fraud operations was staggering. Criminals weren't just opportunistic thieves, but organized networks with access to specialized equipment, authentic parts, and detailed knowledge of classic car manufacturing. They could transform common vehicles into convincing replicas of rare models, complete with documentation that fooled casual inspection. This is why Roy's work was so important. Agent Chen continued. He understood manufacturing details that criminals often overlooked: casting numbers, paint codes, assembly techniques that were specific to certain production runs. His collection served as a reference library for authentic examples. Frank was examining more case files, his expression growing troubled. According to these reports, some fraud networks have been targeting specific collectors, researching their interests, and creating fake versions of cars they know the collectors want to acquire. Exactly, Agent Chen confirmed. These aren't random crimes, but carefully planned operations that exploit collectors' passion for automotive history. Roy helped us understand that protecting the classic car community required both law enforcement and expert knowledge. As they discussed the scope of automotive fraud, Matt began to understand the moral dimensions of their inheritance. The garage wasn't just a collection of valuable cars, but a fortress protecting automotive heritage from organized criminal assault. Agent Chen, Emma asked, if we decided to continue some of Uncle Roy's work, what would that involve? Initially, just maintaining the reference collection and making your expertise available when we encounter suspected frauds. Roy often examined photographs and documentation to provide preliminary assessments before we launched formal investigations. The prospect of continuing Roy's work appealed to Matt's sense of purpose while addressing his need for meaningful employment. Instead of seeking traditional engineering positions, he could apply his analytical skills to protecting automotive heritage work that honored both Roy's legacy and Sarah's passion for classic cars. We'd need training, Matt said thoughtfully. Understanding authentication techniques, learning to spot sophisticated modifications, building relationships with the collector community that Roy cultivated over decades. Frank nodded approvingly. Roy left detailed documentation about authentication methods. Combined with his reference collection and the right guidance, you could develop the expertise needed to continue his work. Emma had been researching online forums where collectors discussed suspected fraudulent vehicles, finding references to Roy's reputation for authentication expertise. Dad, Uncle Roy was legendary in the collector community. People trusted his assessments absolutely because he combined technical knowledge with access to authentic reference examples. As afternoon faded into evening, the scope of their inheritance became clearer. They weren't just inheriting Roy's cars, but his mission, his knowledge network, and his responsibility to protect automotive heritage from criminal exploitation. Agent Chen prepared to leave, but emphasized the FBI's continued interest in their decision. Take time to consider your options. Roy's work was voluntary. He chose to help because he cared about preserving authentic automotive history. We hope you'll feel similarly motivated, but the decision must be yours. After Agent Chen departed, Matt, Emma, and Frank sat in the garage, surrounded by Roy's collection, each vehicle now representing not just automotive history, but also victory over criminal enterprise. These cars had been rescued, authenticated, and preserved through Roy's dedication to justice. Dad, Emma said finally, I think we know what Uncle Roy would want us to do. Matt nodded, feeling Sarah's influence in his daughter's moral clarity. Roy had spent his life protecting what Sarah had loved, and now they could continue that work together, father, daughter, and the friend who'd known them both. We're going to need to learn everything Roy knew, Matt decided. Authentication techniques, fraud patterns, collector network connections. It won't be easy, but it's the right thing to do. Frank smiled broadly. Roy would be proud, and Sarah would understand that you're not just inheriting cars, you're inheriting the responsibility to protect the automotive heritage she cared about. As they secured the garage for the night, Matt felt the weight of decision settling into determination. Tomorrow would begin their transformation from accidental inheritors to dedicated guardians of automotive authenticity, following the path Roy had blazed through decades of quiet heroism in service of truth and preservation. The authenticated ownership documents lay spread across the conference table in Patricia Henderson's law office, like pieces of a complex puzzle finally coming together. 3 weeks of intensive research, FBI consultation, and expert authentication had culminated in this moment, the legal determination of exactly what Matt and Emma had inherited and their rights to continue Roy's work. The documentation is extraordinary, Patricia said, her professional admiration evident as she reviewed the files. Your uncle maintained records that exceed anything I've seen in 30 years of estate law. Every vehicle has clear title, documented provenance, and in most cases, official recognition of legitimate ownership through federal court proceedings. Agent Chen sat across from them, representing the FBI's interest in ensuring Roy's collection remained available for ongoing fraud investigations. Her presence gave weight to the proceedings while also highlighting the collection's significance beyond simple inheritance law. "Mr. Colburn," Agent Chen said, "the Bureau would like to formally recognize your uncle's collection as an official automotive fraud reference database. This designation would provide certain legal protections while establishing your role as custodians of materials important to federal law enforcement." Emma had been studying the individual vehicle documentation, amazed by the thoroughness of Roy's record-keeping. Each car's file contained not just ownership papers, but detailed authentication reports, photographs documenting original condition, and historical research, proving the vehicle's significance to automotive development. "Dad, look at this report on the Shelby," she said, showing him a detailed technical analysis. Uncle Roy didn't just preserve the car, he documented every authentic detail so thoroughly that it serves as a definitive reference for identifying fake Shelbys. The FBI has used this documentation in at least 6 fraud cases. Frank Martinez nodded approvingly from his chair beside them. Over the past weeks, he'd become their unofficial advisor on automotive authentication, his mechanical expertise complementing Roy's documented knowledge to create a formidable team approach to fraud detection. "The collection's value extends far beyond money," Frank observed. "Roy created an irreplaceable resource for protecting automotive heritage. The reference materials alone are worth millions to the collector community." Patricia reviewed the final legal documents that would establish Matt's official ownership of the collection, along with his rights and responsibilities as custodian. "The estate is clear of all liens and obligations. You have complete legal authority over the collection, with the understanding that certain vehicles may be recalled as evidence if ongoing federal investigations require their examination." Matt felt the weight of legitimate ownership settling over him like a well-fitted jacket. For weeks, he'd struggled with uncertainty about their rights to the collection and their ability to honor Roy's legacy appropriately. Now, legal recognition provided the foundation for whatever decisions they made about the future. "Agent Chen," he said, "what exactly would formal recognition as a federal reference collection entail?" "Primarily, it means the FBI would provide training in authentication techniques, access to our fraud database for comparison purposes, and occasional consultation requests when we encounter suspected fraudulent vehicles. In return, you'd maintain the collection's integrity and make it available for legitimate authentication purposes." Emma leaned forward eagerly. "Would we be able to help individual collectors who suspect they might have purchased fraudulent vehicles?" "Absolutely." Roy worked with private collectors as well as law enforcement. His reputation for honest, accurate authentication made him trusted throughout the automotive community. The prospect excited Emma's sense of justice, while appealing to Matt's desire for meaningful work. Instead of simply preserving Roy's collection, they could actively continue his mission of protecting collectors from fraud while preserving automotive heritage for future generations. Frank had been reviewing training materials that Agent Chen had brought, his expression growing more enthusiastic as he studied the technical content. "This is sophisticated stuff, but not beyond what we can learn. Roy's documentation provides the foundation, and FBI training would fill in the gaps." Patricia completed her review of the legal documents and looked up with satisfaction. "Everything is in order. Mr. Colburn, you now have clear legal title to one of the most significant private automotive collections in America, along with the knowledge base and federal relationships necessary to continue your uncle's work." As they signed the final ownership papers, Matt felt a profound sense of responsibility settling over him. This wasn't just inheritance, but investiture. Roy had chosen him to carry forward work that protected something larger than individual ownership. The collection represented automotive heritage that belonged, ultimately, to all enthusiasts who valued authenticity over deception. "Dad," Emma said quietly, "I think Uncle Roy knew this moment would come. All his documentation, his relationships with the FBI, his careful preservation of evidence, he was preparing someone else to continue his work." Agent Chen smiled approvingly. Roy often said that protecting automotive heritage was too important to depend on one person. He was building a legacy that could survive and continue beyond his own involvement. Frank nodded thoughtfully. Sarah would have understood Roy's vision. She believed cars were living history that deserved protection from those who would corrupt or destroy authentic heritage for profit. The authentication documents had done more than establish legal ownership. They had revealed the full scope of Roy's contribution to automotive fraud prevention and the significance of continuing his work. Matt and Emma weren't just inheriting valuable cars, but accepting responsibility for protecting an entire community of collectors from sophisticated criminal enterprises. As they prepared to leave Patricia's office, Matt carried copies of ownership documents that represented not just financial security, but meaningful purpose. The collection was officially theirs, along with the knowledge, relationships, and moral obligation to use it in service of automotive authenticity. "Emma," he said as they walked to their car, "are you ready to become automotive fraud investigators?" His daughter smiled with the confidence that had been growing throughout their journey, from desperate inheritance to purposeful mission. "Dad, I think I was born ready. Mom would be proud that we're protecting something she loved, and Uncle Roy would be satisfied that his life's work continues." The authenticated ownership documents had formalized their transformation from accidental inheritors to chosen guardians, establishing the legal foundation for whatever challenges lay ahead in their mission to protect automotive heritage from those who would steal, corrupt, or destroy it for profit. The museum partnership agreement represented everything Matt had never dared to dream possible when he first stepped into Roy's crumbling garage 6 months earlier. Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman from the National Automotive Heritage Museum had spent 3 days examining the collection, her excitement growing with each vehicle she documented and authenticated. "Mr. Colburn," she said, reviewing the proposed partnership terms, "this collection represents one of the most significant assemblages of authenticated American muscle cars and prototype vehicles in existence. The museum partnership would provide public access while maintaining the collection's integrity and research value." Emma sat beside Matt, her acceptance letter to the University of Michigan's Automotive Engineering program tucked in her folder alongside scholarship documents that would cover her full tuition. The partnership agreement included provisions for her continued involvement in the collection during her studies, creating a path that honored both academic achievement and family legacy. "The restoration workshop component is particularly exciting," Dr. Hoffman continued. "Your uncle's documentation methods and authentication expertise, combined with your family's commitment to preservation, would create an educational resource that benefits the entire automotive community." Frank Martinez beamed with pride from his seat across the table. His official appointment as the collection's curator and restoration supervisor, representing the culmination of decades of automotive expertise, finally receiving professional recognition. At 78, he discovered a new career that honored both his mechanical skills and his friendship with Roy. "Frank's knowledge of classic automotive restoration techniques is exceptional," Dr. Hoffman noted. "The museum is particularly interested in his understanding of period-correct materials and methods. We see tremendous educational value in documenting traditional restoration approaches." The partnership structure addressed all of Matt's concerns about maintaining the collection's integrity while ensuring public benefit. The museum would provide insurance, security, and conservation expertise, while Matt's family retained ownership and decision-making authority over authentication services and research activities. The FBI consultation component adds another dimension to the partnership, Dr. Hoffman observed. "Museums rarely have the opportunity to contribute directly to law enforcement while serving educational missions. Your uncle's legacy creates unique possibilities for public service." Agent Chen, participating by video conference from the FBI field office, expressed strong support for the partnership proposal. "The Bureau considers this collection invaluable for training purposes and ongoing fraud investigations. Museum partnership would enhance security while maintaining our access for legitimate law enforcement purposes." Emma had been studying the agreement's provisions for student internships and research opportunities, her excitement evident as she discussed possibilities with Dr. Hoffman. Would students be able to work on actual authentication projects, or would educational activities be separate from the FBI consultation work? Both, potentially. Senior students working under proper supervision could contribute to research projects while learning authentication techniques. It would provide exceptional hands-on experience in automotive forensics and preservation science. Matt felt profound satisfaction as he reviewed the agreement's financial terms, which provided sustainable income through museum partnership fees, consultation services, and educational programs. The arrangement offered financial security while ensuring the collection's continued service to the automotive community. Dr. Hoffman, he said, "This partnership honors everything my uncle worked to achieve while providing opportunities I never imagined possible. My daughter gets world-class education in automotive engineering. Frank receives professional recognition for his expertise, and the collection continues serving the community Roy cared about." Frank nodded approvingly. Roy would be amazed by how this developed. He preserved those cars, thinking about individual collectors who needed authentic references. He never imagined the collection would become a national educational resource. The agreement included provisions for documenting Roy's authentication methods and fraud detection techniques, ensuring his knowledge would be preserved and shared with future specialists. Emma would play a key role in this documentation project, combining her research skills with growing technical knowledge. "The timing is perfect," Dr. Hoffman noted. "Classic car values continue rising, making fraud increasingly attractive to criminal enterprises. Your collection and expertise will become more valuable each year as the need for authentication services grows." As they finalized the partnership agreement, Matt reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months earlier, he'd been a failing father counting grocery money with his disappointed daughter. Now they were partners in preserving automotive heritage while building sustainable careers around their shared interests. "Emma," he said, "are you satisfied with how this protects what Uncle Roy and your mother cared about?" His daughter smiled with the confidence that had grown throughout their adventure. "Dad, I think we're not just preserving their legacy, we're expanding it. Mom wanted to restore classic cars. Uncle Roy wanted to protect authentic automotive heritage, and now we're doing both while helping other people learn about the cars they loved." Agent Chen's voice came through the video connection with obvious approval. "The FBI considers this partnership a model for how private collections can serve public benefit while supporting law enforcement objectives. Your uncle's work will continue through official channels that enhance its impact." Frank was already making plans for organizing the restoration workshop, his enthusiasm infectious as he described teaching opportunities and student projects. "We'll document everything: traditional restoration techniques, authentication methods, preservation science. Roy's knowledge won't be lost." Dr. Hoffman presented the final partnership agreement for signature, her professional satisfaction evident as she witnessed the collection's transition from private inheritance to public resource. This represents exactly the kind of collaboration museums hope to achieve, preserving heritage while serving community needs and supporting ongoing research. As Matt signed the agreement, he felt Sarah's presence strongly, imagining her approval of their decision to continue her automotive dreams through educational service. The collection would honor both Roy's preservation mission and Sarah's restoration passion, while providing Emma with opportunities that combined family legacy with professional development. The museum partnership agreement had transformed their inheritance from burden to blessing, creating sustainable careers around work they loved while serving the automotive community that Roy had protected throughout his life. Emma's scholarship and Frank's curatorship represented dreams fulfilled through commitment to preserving what previous generations had built and saved. "Dr. Hoffman," Emma said as they concluded the meeting, "when do we start?" Sarah's restored 1969 Camaro SS gleamed under the soft lights of the Heritage Museum's main display floor, its rally green paint reflecting the pride and patience that Matt and Emma had poured into every detail of its resurrection. The restoration had taken them 18 months, working together in the garage that had become their second home, learning techniques that honored both Sarah's vision and Roy's exacting standards. "She would have loved seeing this finished," Emma said softly, running her hand along the Camaro's perfect fender lines. At 19, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had discovered her life's purpose early. her automotive engineering studies at Michigan complementing practical restoration experience in ways that impressed even veteran professionals. Matt nodded, remembering the photographs they'd found of Sarah working on this same car in Roy's garage 25 years earlier. Her restoration notebook had guided their work, her careful plans finally reaching completion through their combined efforts and Frank's patient instruction in period-correct techniques. The museum's grand opening celebration buzzed with excitement around them as collectors, students, and automotive enthusiasts explored displays that showcased both individual vehicles and the authentication methods Roy had developed over decades of fraud investigation. The collection had found its perfect home, serving education while maintaining its research mission. "Mr. Colburn?" A young woman approached with notebook in hand, her press credentials identifying her as a reporter from Classic Car Weekly. "Could you tell our readers about your family's journey from inheritance to museum partnership?" Matt smiled, comfortable now with the public recognition that had grown around their story. "We discovered that preservation isn't just about maintaining old cars, it's about maintaining the knowledge and passion that created them. My Uncle Roy and my wife Sarah understood that classic cars represent human creativity and engineering achievement that deserves protection from those who would exploit it." Emma joined the conversation, her enthusiasm for their work evident as she explained authentication techniques to the reporter. "Every car tells a story, but fraud operations try to create false stories that deceive collectors and corrupt automotive history. Our job is protecting truth so people can enjoy authentic heritage." Frank Martinez moved through the museum displays like a proud grandfather, explaining restoration techniques to fascinated visitors while sharing stories about Roy's meticulous preservation methods. At 80, he'd become the museum's most popular docent, his combination of technical expertise and storytelling ability making classic car history accessible to audiences of all ages. "The thing people don't realize," Frank told a group of high school students, "is that these cars weren't just transportation, they were expressions of American optimism and engineering creativity. Every detail matters because each represents someone's commitment to building something better than what came before." Dr. Hoffman approached Matt with obvious satisfaction, her vision for the museum partnership exceeding all expectations as visitor numbers and educational program enrollment continued growing. "Matt, I wanted you to know that the FBI has requested our assistance with 3 major fraud cases this month alone. Your uncle's authentication database is proving invaluable to investigators." The museum partnership had evolved beyond their original agreement, becoming a national resource for automotive authentication, while providing Emma with research opportunities that would shape her graduate studies in automotive forensics, a field that barely existed before Roy's pioneering work with federal investigators. "Dad," Emma said, "I still can't believe how much our lives changed from that first day when we pulled the tarp off the Shelby. Remember how overwhelmed we felt just trying to figure out what Uncle Roy had left us?" Matt remembered that moment vividly, the sensation of discovering treasure that seemed too good to be true. Now he understood that the real treasure hadn't been the car's monetary value, but the purpose and connection they'd provided, bringing his family together while continuing work that mattered to something larger than themselves. Agent Chen approached with a thick file folder, her presence at the museum's opening celebration, highlighting the ongoing partnership between the collection and federal law enforcement. "Matt, Emma, I wanted to update you on the latest case where your authentication work made the difference. That fraudulent Boss 429 we examined last month, the perpetrators pled guilty rather than face trial. Your technical analysis was so thorough they couldn't dispute the evidence." Emma beamed with pride, her growing reputation in automotive forensics already attracting attention from law enforcement agencies across the country. "Agent Chen, are you seeing any new fraud patterns we should be aware of?" "Actually, yes. Criminals are becoming more sophisticated, but your documentation methods are staying ahead of their techniques. The museum partnership has allowed us to train more agents in automotive authentication, which is proving crucial as classic car values continue rising." As evening approached and the opening celebration wound down, Matt found himself standing with Emma and Frank in the garage workshop behind the museum's main building. This space had become their sanctuary, where restoration work continued, the mission Roy and Sarah had begun decades earlier. The workshop housed current projects in various stages of completion, vehicles brought by collectors seeking authentication, cars donated for student restoration training, and pieces of Roy's collection undergoing preservation maintenance. Each project represented the living continuation of automotive heritage protection. "Dad," Emma said, reviewing their schedule for the coming months, "we've got authentication requests from collectors in 12 states, 3 FBI consultation projects, and 4 student restoration teams starting new projects. I think Uncle Roy would be amazed by how his work has grown." Matt nodded, thinking about the quiet man who had spent decades working alone to preserve automotive heritage while serving federal investigations. Roy's legacy had evolved into an institution that served thousands of people while maintaining the integrity he'd valued above all else. Frank was organizing tools for tomorrow's work, his movements still precise despite his age. "You know what I think Roy would appreciate most? That we're not just preserving his cars, we're teaching other people to carry on the work. Every student who learns proper restoration techniques, every collector who learns to spot fraud, every agent who can authenticate vehicles, they're all continuing what Roy started." The workshop's walls displayed photographs documenting their journey from inheritance to institution, images of their first discoveries, restoration progress on various projects, student graduations, and successful fraud prosecutions. The pictures told the story of transformation through dedication to something larger than personal benefit. "Emma," Matt said, "do you ever wonder what your mother would think about all this?" His daughter smiled thoughtfully. "I think she'd be proud that we found a way to honor both her dreams and Uncle Roy's mission. She wanted to restore classic cars, and now we're doing that while also protecting the entire hobby from people who would corrupt it." As they prepared to lock up the workshop for the evening, Matt took one last look at Sarah's Camaro, now the centerpiece of a display about restoration philosophy and period-correct techniques. The car represented completion not just of mechanical restoration, but of the family healing that had begun with their first day in Roy's garage. "Frank," he said, "thank you for guiding us through all this. Without your expertise and friendship, we never could have honored Roy's legacy properly." The older man smiled with satisfaction that came from a life's work, finally receiving proper recognition. "Matt, helping you and Emma discover your purpose has been the greatest privilege of my retirement. Roy and Sarah would be proud of what you've built." Outside, the museum's lighting cast long shadows across the parking lot, where visitors had spent the day exploring automotive heritage and learning about authentication techniques that protected collectors from fraud. The building hummed with quiet activity as security systems engaged and climate control maintained perfect conditions for preserving irreplaceable vehicles. Matt and Emma walked to their car, a practical sedan that seemed almost mundane after spending days surrounded by classic muscle cars, but which represented the foundation of stability that allowed them to pursue meaningful work without financial desperation. "Dad," Emma said as they drove home through familiar streets, "remember when we used to count grocery money on the kitchen table?" Matt laughed at the memory, though it felt like something that had happened to different people. "I remember feeling like such a failure because I couldn't provide for you properly. Now I realize that struggle was preparing us for something we couldn't have imagined." "Uncle Roy's garage didn't just save us financially," Emma observed. "It gave us purpose, brought us closer together, and connected us to Mom's memory in ways we never expected." As they turned into their driveway, Matt reflected on the journey that had brought them from desperation to fulfillment. The modest house looked the same, but everything inside had changed. Walls now displayed photographs of restoration projects, bookshelves held automotive technical manuals, and Emma's desk overflowed with scholarship applications and research papers on automotive forensics. "Emma," he said as they prepared for bed, "what do you think is next for us?" His daughter's answer came without hesitation. "We keep learning, keep growing, and keep protecting the automotive heritage that Uncle Roy and Mom cared about. There's always another car to authenticate, another fraud to expose, another student to teach proper restoration techniques." That night, Matt dreamed of Sarah working alongside Roy in the garage, both of them smiling with satisfaction as they saw Emma learning proper welding techniques, while Frank demonstrated period-correct paint application methods. In his dream, the past and present merged seamlessly, creating a continuum of care and knowledge that would extend far into the future. Sarah's restored Camaro had become more than a completed project. It was a symbol of dreams fulfilled through patience, learning, and commitment to excellence. The car represented everything they'd discovered about the value of preserving authentic heritage while building meaningful careers around work they loved. The garage that had once seemed like a burden had become their gateway to purpose, community, and the satisfaction of protecting something important for future generations. Uncle Roy's collection lived on, not as static displays but as active tools in the ongoing fight to preserve automotive authenticity against those who would corrupt it for profit. In the end, Matt realized, they hadn't just inherited cars, they'd inherited the responsibility and privilege of continuing work that mattered. Surrounded by people who shared their commitment to preserving the best of American automotive heritage for everyone who would appreciate its significance.